high automation in unregulated context, and for that, Ryan Fuller will be joining us.
I will start by welcoming Ryan.
Thank you.
As you describe your scenario, maybe you could also let us know as we go just a little bit how it may contrast with what Joseph set up for us, just to give us a little context around that.
And also from a human resources lens, because Ryan Fuller is a professor of human resources and organizational behavior, also with expertise in communication. So we'll probably get different insights now.
So I'm a tech-savvy, non-tech person, is how I would describe myself, which allows me to kind of remove some of the restraints. So in contrast, my scenario is one where there's lower regulation or deregulation, and also high degrees of automation. And so when you are removing regulation, whether that is kind of taking away the status quo of regulation that we have, laws, whether it's at the state level or the national level, and removing those in order to, say, promote innovation. What that means is that you're giving kind of the platform owners ownership and responsibility for kind of enforcing what happens on the platform.
Can you give us an example of that, Ryan, just to sort of clarify?
An example of giving ownership of, so I think of pick a tech company like Facebook, where there's been some tension around what people say on the platform, and they say, let us regulate it, and they had content moderators at first, and then political winds change, and they say, no content moderators anymore, and so that's kind of what I mean when you're a real example where you're removing some of the barriers.
And you tie this to Matrix, which I'm really curious about.
Yeah.
How does it lead to Matrix?
So I chose the Matrix to imagine a future that's defined by high automation and low regulation. So in the film, humans are literal energy sources for machines. Now, that's not a future that I actually envision for us in the next 10 years, but it's more metaphorical in the sense that in our fictitious workplace that I've imagined, humans are data sources, which are the energy of machines. We're tracked, nudged, and optimized by systems to shape our behavior at scale. And so the Matrix essentially warns us about giving too much control to technology. And so I created this sort of ominous, you could consider it, more or less ominous image of an algorithmic manager who's named Person of the Year. You may recall back to, I think, Time Magazine, I don't remember the year exactly, but this was when kind of popularization of YouTube, they named you as the Person of the Year. So if we could go to the next slide, I'd like to then kind of discuss this imagined scenario. So by 2035, artificial intelligence had advanced rapidly, faster than governments could respond. Silicon Valley insisted that we stop and roll back regulations in order to allow for unfettered innovation to compete against the likes of China. And so this competition became a rallying cry, and AI was framed as a new moonshot. So starting around 2030, in my imagined scenario, a new model of office work emerged that was automated, gamified, and driven by data, which you can see in my example here from a fictitious New York Times article, Game On, How Silicon Valley Hacked Human Motivation and Rewired the Office. So promoted by thought leaders in white papers, business press, and social media, the Silicon Valley model promised a solution to a longstanding problem that's been tracked year over year by companies like Gallup, which is engagement at work. For years, engagement has been slumping. So by 2034, everything at work was gamified. And this was a natural step for Gen Zers and Gen Alpha generation, some of whom are in the room. Raised on games and apps and shaped by COVID, this felt natural.
And work is a play.
And work is play, exactly. Every behavior tracked, every interaction recorded. Privacy gave way to transparency. AI managers mean fewer human managers, but they don't totally go away. You still need humans to do tasks that AI can't do, but the algorithms are tracking workers' movements, keystrokes, conversations, and combining them with psychological profiles of workers. The battery of instruments that you complete. We're both survey researchers, right? So we do these things. And workers are nudged not just toward tasks, but also to boost their mood. And so AI adjusts its tone and personality to get the very best out of people. The human...
And I can see a turning point in there because we know from research that if, for instance, somebody is monitored constantly, at some point people don't care.
Yeah.
So they kind of adapt.
Right.
But in return, if I'm as an employee being constantly paid attention to,
Right.
not only my work, but also my needs, my feelings, and being a loneliness researcher, if I'm asked, regularly, whether I feel connected to my work environment, maybe there's a bright side into this
Perhaps,
quite interesting story, which seems dark, but there's also some turning points maybe that can come out.
I would add a question to that, Ryan. Does this mean, so are there low levels of this already being deployed with workers today, not related to AI? This, as soon as you said gamification, all of this monitoring, I thought, so obvious. I would think this would have been
surveillance has been happening in the workplace for a while. There are some studies going back, research on groups and group communication where people were wearing RFID badges and gauging their interaction with one another. At first it seemed weird, right? We're wearing badges. But then over time, as Hakan noted, people stop kind of noticing that they're being watched. The research suggests that people don't really like apart from that study, that people don't really like to be surveilled. And to your point about the bright spot and the attention, we all remember something called Zoom fatigue, right? We were during COVID where we were constantly on Zoom meetings, and it was like, oh, this is great. Actually, I can have back to back meetings, and then it's like, oh wow, I'm really tired. And so that sort of stimulation, I think, can lead to being tired, and that's actually something that I would be concerned about in this scenario is, where you're constantly on, and it's hard to blur the boundary between what's work and what's life, because work is fun, work is play. I'm looking to see, Hakan passed me at work in this game that is work, I better catch up.
After dinner. Hey,
after
Ryan.
dinner.
But the human capacity to adapt is kind of scary. And if you look at in the history, there's been all sorts of weird periods that we cannot believe that people as a society collectively did those things. So now, assuming that some of things happens, what would be a major challenge for a reasonable manager who's also human-centered 10 years from now, and what would you recommend to this manager?
So if I'm a manager 10 years from now in the gamified, data-centric workplace, I'm concerned about establishing authentic relationships with my workers. A lot of my role as a manager has been datafied, and I'm not a term. I guess it is a term. Has been put into interpreting, reading data, and the human side may be a little bit lost. So trying to maintain that authenticity and maintaining relationships And also understanding that when the system is rewarding potentially performance and performance of positivity, trying to understand, what is real performance and what is, what is just faking it to make it.
And instead of having a formal chat when I have a question about our work relationship, I'll just fill out a coworker survey and send it to you at the end of the day, and you read it from there, and then you'll act on it.
Yeah.
Speaking of lack of authenticity.
Right. And I think also in that environment, you're right, relationships, which are so critical to the workplace and to being human. I could see in this scenario, you described completing a survey, but it could also be taking the volumes and volumes of data that people are generating and having the algorithm suggest workplace friendships. You two are collaborative. You should be.
Why don't you just have a lunch together?
Yeah, exactly. And or if there are potentially problematic employees, right? You're trying to maybe match them with somebody who is less problematic, who would be a good mentor for them.
So a lot of navigation skills required. What would you recommend to job candidates 10 years from now for a white-collar position in this super intricate work environment where things can go in either direction?
Yeah. So a job candidate 10 years from now would need to be data literate. So they need to understand that their performance is being constantly evaluated and, how to interpret those data. They need to be well-skilled in digital communication, since everything's dashboarded. They would also need to have a strong sense of personal boundaries, right? And be able to say, this is work and this is non-work.
So literally managing yourself as a whole human being to survive in this highly controlled environment.
Yeah. Before we switch, can I just read? So I took my scenario and put it into ChatGPT 4.0. And so I asked it to generate, so it knows the scenario. I asked it to generate a job description, which I won't read the entire job description, but I want to read what it said about who you are. Fluent in workplace gamification mechanics, comfortable with full scope behavioral transparency, emotionally intelligent and willing to adjust tone style based on AI feedback, highly self-aware with strong psychometric compatibility for dynamic team flow. This sounds like technical jargon, and proactive in maintaining digital wellness through system-approved mindfulness protocols.
System approved.
Yeah.
Exclusively system approved.
Game on.
It's fascinating. We are talking about this in an unregulated environment.
Yeah.
But think about the regulation that came in naturally.
Yeah.
Through different. So maybe it's better to have a government regulation on certain things than not having regulation.
Right. I mean, often it's often an argument that to protect against regulation we'll do it ourselves, right? Let us do it.
Okay, let's get some questions about high AI automation in unregulated contexts.
Hi, my name is Brittany Jimenez. I'm an MIS major here at Sac State. And my question is, how can we ensure that benefits from AI automation without regulation are distributed fairly between all levels of society? Or would this mainly benefit large corporations / the upper class?
So in this environment that is regulated or that is unregulated or that has lower regulation, the question that you have just posed is one where regulation would kind of come in and ensure distribution of the resources that are generated from AI. My sense is that in this environment, companies would make some argument to the effect that there will be benefits to their employees from this sort of approach, that they're capable of regulating, that you you don't want to step in and which would prevent the companies from innovating. But really, I think in this setting, that's kind of one where regulation would have to step in.
I think this second scenario has the potentially higher risk, but it may also potentially be the most rewarding scenario too. Because if you think under the conditions that the automation frees people's time from mundane repetitive tasks, and the unregulation opens doors for innovation and the business opportunities, this can end up in a completely different scenario, right? What I wanted to ask is, along the path, what would be the key decisions to be made to end up in a positive outcome than the other way?
Yeah, that's a great question and a tough one. I think that in order for that to happen, we have to have a conversation as a society at kind of different levels about what are the things that we value and care about, and try to incorporate those values into our companies, into the platforms. When we were discussing developing these different scenarios, we didn't kind of go big on some of the details about what happens if automation really takes off. What sort of things would have to change about our social structure and the social contract, and so I think a conversation around what is it that we value is something that would have to take it into a positive direction, right? I think at the table I mentioned that there's a book that kind of envisions this utopia where all of a sudden the work that we do is fully automated, and we, as you said, have all of this free time now, and that world is one where you have things like universal basic income that kind of provides or that prevents a total economic collapse, and ensures that people have financial stability to also go along with the free time, and one that I think so many people have kind of viewed their work as their sense of purpose, and it would also entail people rethinking what purpose is apart from work.
And I think this ties to this Bell rule that Joseph mentioned earlier, that if you look at the history of inventions, there's usually a gap between invention and it gets into the economy, and which is usually a bargaining between stakeholders in the society. Now we've got this, what are we going to do with this? So I think we are now in that phase, and I think we do have voice, and we can bring in some influence in the directions that things can take. And that's the very reason why actually we are doing this event, and we'll probably do more of these, because the more you hold these conversations and the more we can visualize alternative paths through organizations, through social groups, through unions, through elections. So there's a lot of channels where this voice is going to be raised. So I wouldn't be surprised in the next couple of years where political parties will have their fully defined agendas around how AI labor will be managed. And I think it's going to become very soon a political topic that then voices will be coming more directly.
So can we talk a little bit possibly about, instead of regulation, which is more societal or communal regulation, and self-regulation, say through ethics? So I believe it was Asimov, the 3 robotic rules, do no harm, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Can you see that? Because I can see in an unregulated context where people may go wild and say, how do I game this system to find all the loopholes to exploit my task? which in essence, you're not breaking the rules, right? Because you're trying to circumvent them.
Yeah.
But if we have that self-regulation where it's culturally imbued, do you see that? How do you see that on this spectrum between regulated and unregulated?
So just to summarize the question, it's about where does kind of individual regulation come into this? Because in an unregulated or lower regulated environment, people may be kind of prone to find loopholes. Yeah, and actually that's something in video games, right? They encourage you to find Easter eggs or loopholes in order to to circumvent the system or to get to the next level. And so perhaps in this environment, that's something that is encouraged. I could see in this particular environment, one where there's, for lack of a better term, concerted control, which is kind of group pressures that encourage people to not, break the rules, or things like related to the organizational culture, right? Where it's friendly competition, right, as opposed to, oh, you're the guy who's going to cheat at everything in order to get ahead. But I think the group pressure is going to be part of it.
And I would also suggest trial and errors. And again, going back to the analogy of early 1900s, after the Industrial Revolution when electricity was invented, in the first decade of 1900s, 20th century, in England, there's an era called Edwardian era, when people where about 140,000 products were patented that works with electricity. And people were dying on a daily basis because they had these hats that works with electricity, tablecloths, like houses were on fire, and a lot of things learned in a very short period of time. It didn't last long. And then now nobody actually has serious problems with electricity unless something terrible happens. So eventually I think it goes back to the humankind and our adaptability, but also collective adaptability. But we might have some crazy experiences coming out soon until we go through that quote unquote Edwardian era of the AI. So I don't know what terrible and crazy things will happen to let us know that, you know what, that's not a good idea. Let's don't do this again, and we should maybe do things differently. What we call, I guess, common sense. Thank you so much, Ryan.